In a world where Africans have lost their roots, it has become of vital importance to document our ways. In an effort to reverse the brainwashing of the past, where we were made to believe our ways are demonic, we are pressed to create dignified and respectful platforms to unpack our spiritual ways. Moya Ulight, Moya Upright, welcome to another exciting episode of Moya. Thank you for all the support you guys are giving us. Thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing. As usual, the bank details are on screen. The only reason we can be here is because you guys are contributing. So thank you so much for all the love. So you guys have been asking me for this guest for a while now. As you know what the Moyarites want, the Moyarites will get. It is a great privilege and honor to introduce today's guest. I'm going to allow him to introduce his own titles and stuff so I don't disrespect him in any ways. But we know him as Gogo Aubrey Matshiqi. Such a privilege, a historian and teacher, one of our favorite Pan-Africanists, our elder, our father, Gogo. Kamaku.
Kamaku, Togozan.
Enkos for joining us. I'm going to ask you to first give the titles you do. Who are you?
Well, I laugh because when I'm introduced, I sometimes wonder who they are talking about. So you've just referred to me as a Pan-Africanist historian.
Political analyst.
Political analyst.
Gogo.
So the two accusations or allegations that I respond to positively is the allegation that I'm a healer and the allegation that I'm an independent political analyst. There are many allegations about me. But let me start here. When my mother was pregnant with me, my paternal grandmother and my paternal grandmother, Gwaba Kebindev, Liwushegaz, Umjoli, Ibaka. So umakhulu says, lo mntana igama lakhe iza kuba nguSithethi. This child's name, when he is born, will be Sithethi.
The speaker.
One speaks on behalf of others, the speaker, and so on, the teacher, and all of that. My parents did not give me that name. When I ask why, my mother says, we both felt if this child is given the name Sithethi, uza kuthetha gqithi, will talk too much. So they were quite literal in their understanding of this name. Now, my belief is that it is not my grandmother who gives me this name. My belief is that this name is given to me through my grandmother. And this name speaks to my mission, to my purpose, that ndizakuba nguSithethi. Now, if you look at everything I have done so far, my grandmother was right. I was a teacher for 10 years, for instance. I have been a government spokesperson. I'm a political analyst, and I'm a teacher in many other ways. So my grandmother was right that I should have been called Sithethi. I have, by the way, resuscitated the name. My ancestors guided me to start an institution that will do the work of Moya. And the institution is called Ilanga, Khanya Sithethi, Home for Spiritual Reflection. So I decided to ukulivusa eligama and give it a life. So when I was born, I was given the name Aubrey, which has many good meanings. Noble king, one who triumphs over adversity, and so on. Now, I don't know whether it was by design or just a coincidence that they then named me Umongameli. And Umongameli is my paternal grandfather. And I'm given this name while he is still alive. So my names are Aubrey Mongameli. But of course, when I go to a Peshweni, Gyothwasa, izinyanya give me another name, Udungezweni. Udungezweni odunga amatulo abathakathi. Udungezweni odunga amayelenqe amagqwirha. That's the name given to me by my ancestors, and that is my mission. He who disrupts the work of the evil and wicked. That's me. Udungezweni odunga amatulo abathakathi. Udungezweni odunga amatulo amayelenqe amagqwirha. So that's the name my ancestors give me. That's why I am called Udungezweni. So I don't use the whole name because, as you can see, the name is an essay. My surname is Matshiqi. Now, my surname is butchered in so many ways, but my surname is Matshiqi. Ndingumtshilibe, ubhanqo, umdumane, ndize, langa lokulunga, ntshontsho, mgabibi, msuthu, bobese, gawula bathakathi. Now, of course, esasiduko, that plain name Msuthu is there for a reason. For a long time, I think I am Xhosa, until I meet an old man in Soweto, in Netherlands, who, upon asking me for isiduko, I say Mtshilibe. And after giving him my surname, he had said Ungumxhosa. I said yes. When I tell him isiduko sam ngumtshilibe, he says, no, you can't be Mtshilibe and be Xhosa. So I say to him, look, I am Xhosa. My father is Xhosa. His father was Xhosa. My great-grandfather was Xhosa. He says, no, you can't be Mtshilibe and Mxhosa and be Xhosa. Amantshilibe are not Xhosa. So I start thinking, I think the South African breweries is doing its work here because we were at a wedding.
Okay.
And so, okay, I say to him, if I'm not Xhosa, what am I? He says, Motswana. I say, no, I'm not Motswana. I'm Xhosa. He says, I can take you now to your people. There's a village in Botswana where you will find your people. Mantshilibe. I then decide that the alcohol content must have been very high, so I give up. I don't argue further. 4 years later, I'm doing an assignment on whether Sir George Grey was responsible for the Nongause incident, the Xhosa cattle killing. Because I was majoring in history. I majored in history and English literature. One of the reference works I use is The House of Phalo, And I realized that the last chapter is a chapter on clan names. I then decided to check. There is isiduko sam. It says, Amanchilibe, Sotho migrants who migrated from what is now Lesotho to what is now in the Eastern Cape. In fact, Lamantshilibe asithi end up eMqhekezweni, eMthatha. But uMatshiqi at some point leaves eMqhekezweni, goes back to Edutywa, where they had come from. Before that, the story is told that my people came from Kugatyana. And then, of course, the story takes us back all the way to Lesotho, to what is now Lesotho. Kimukwena. Silento ke ekuthiwa ngamaXhosa avela ebesuthwini. In areas such as Sterkspruit, where Lamantshilibe did not move deeper into the Eastern Cape, they are still very conscious that kibakwena, so ndingumkwena, because amantshilibe ngabesuthu abavela ngamaXhosa avela ebesuthwini. But I am much more complex than that in my identity. Yes, kisitlukhulu sabakwena. So apha egazini lam bakhona besuthu, akhona amaXhosa, akhona amabhaca, akhona amampondo, bakhona belungu, masarwa ateng. And when you ask me, what are you? I hesitate, because there was a time I would not have hesitated. I would have said, I am Xhosa. I hesitate because I'm many things, and I celebrate all of them. Because all these ancestors, Abesuthu, amaXhosa, Masarwa, Abelungu, Amabhaca, Amampondo, all of them have contributed to making me who and what I am. And maybe the last thing I must say on this part, ndizalwa nguLizo, uLizo mtatam, who grew up in Cape Town. Those who know him in Cape Town, they will know the name John Bull. That's my father, John Bull, uLizo. My mother, nguMancube uThandiwe, so ngumzilankatha, umlandela langa, isakhamuzi ngomkhonto. Mandime apho kwangoku.
With history, ne, and knowing that human beings are like a virus that just, and our true identity, and the fact that we probably we come from one people, and that's why you're saying that you've got all these. How do we make sense of it? Can you give us the picture? Because what happens at these white schools we go to, we don't get given the history of our lineage and how we expand and move and how we would all be brothers and sisters actually.
Well, let me ask you a question. How many Africans are there in the diaspora? You can take a guess. There are 8 billion people on this planet. So how many Africans are there in the diaspora?
I would, okay, I take it to 1 billion.
1 billion?
Yeah.
Okay. There are 1 billion people on this continent.
Okay.
And 7 billion Africans in the diaspora. Let me tell you why.
What?
There are 7 billion Africans in the diaspora. Let me tell you why.
There's more Africans in the diaspora than in Africa.
Well, let me tell you why.
Okay.
And then we'll come back to that question.
Okay, fine.
Do you accept that Africa is the cradle of humankind?
Yes.
If Africa is the cradle of humankind, all 8 billion of us
Yes.
have common ancestors from here,
Yes.
from
Yes.
Africa.
Yes.
Therefore, all 8 billion of us are African.
Yeah.
1 billion of us are on this continent, and 7 billion live outside the continent. And that's why I say there are 7 billion Africans in the diaspora. So whether you are Chinese, European,
Oh, that's what you mean. That
Latin
flew over my head.
American,
Okay, yes.
because we all have a common ancestor here. This place, this continent, which is the cradle of humankind, all 8 billion of us on this planet are African. And therefore, there are 7 billion Africans in the diaspora. And that is why it pains me when I think about colonialism and coloniality. Because colonialism is pain and suffering visited by Africans on their African brothers and sisters. That's why it pains me. This is pain and suffering they visit on their blood, their brothers and sisters. Now, of course, colonialism is informed by a particular logic we refer to as coloniality. What coloniality does is to say that those who are not European and white are ontologically inferior. So those who are not European and white are not human. Even if they are human, they are not as human as those who are European and white. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that those who are not European and white are epistemologically inferior. They lack, because they're not human, the capacity to create knowledge and to grasp knowledge. Now, F.W. de Klerk, when he rejects the idea or the reality that apartheid was a crime against humanity, it is because of this thing we call coloniality that he cannot understand that apartheid was a crime against humanity, because the victims of apartheid were not white, were not European, and therefore were not human, and therefore apartheid cannot be a crime against humanity when it was perpetrated against those who are not white, who are not European,
Those who are animals.
who are not human. And that is why he struggles. It is because of coloniality that he struggles to understand and accept that apartheid was a crime against humanity. So when you go back to where I start, where I say all 8 billion of us are African, the crime of colonialism is visited upon those who are African by those who are African. It is visited by those who are, by Africans who are in the diaspora in Europe. So these Europeans are in the diaspora in Europe. Their origins are African because we and they have the same ancestors who come from here, Africa. So the crime of colonialism is visited upon the African by other Africans who are in the diaspora in Europe. That is why I say to you, there are 7 billion Africans in the diaspora. Now, Malidoma talks about the paradox of colonialism, about how the colonizer is haunted by guilt, the guilt of what he does to the colonized in Africa. But remember what I'm saying. the colonizer and the colonized are African. So the colonizer visits the crime of colonialism on his African brother and sister. He is then haunted by the guilt. At some level, the reason why, what I call white arrogance, a lot of which we experience these days in this country, the reason for white arrogance in this country is twofold. Firstly, it comes from the fact that white arrogance has a material basis.
Yeah.
Because white people are in control of the economy.
Yeah.
So their arrogance has a material basis.
Yeah.
The second thing is that it comes from denial. Firstly, they deny that they're African. And with that denial goes another denial. Because they deny that they're African, they either deny or are unconscious that their ancestors, the colonizers, who themselves had ancestors who come from here, perpetrated the crime of colonialism on their fellow Africans. Now, I am willing to accept that the descendant of the colonizer is unconscious of this element, that colonialism in part is about a perpetrator, a colonizer, who is in the diaspora in Europe, but in essence is African, visiting the crime of colonialism on his African brother and sister. So he's haunted by the guilt. And I think there's an extent to which this colonizer is even unconscious of the source of his guilt. Now, those who are colonized are haunted by their anger and hatred for the colonizer. Now, for me, what I take from Malidoma's idea of the paradox of colonialism is this. If what I've said so far is correct, that we were colonized by our African brothers and sisters, and if I am correct in saying that there is a level at which this colonizer is not conscious of the fact that being European means he's an African in the diaspora, and therefore, by perpetrating the crime of colonialism, is perpetrating the crime of colonialism on his African brother and sister. I'm willing to accept there is an extent to which the colonizer is not aware of this, is unconscious of this.
You're saying that white people don't
dynamic.
realize that they're black.
They don't. There is a time, there's one of my favorite thinkers is the former Greek finance minister. He was finance minister in 2015 when the Greek economy was going through quite a deep crisis. Yanis Varoufakis. Yanis Varoufakis gives a lecture somewhere in England, and he says to the audience, we're all African. I think at that point, they should have sent many an ambulance, because I think the heart of almost everyone in that audience stopped. Because the idea of being African is repugnant, symbolic of so many things that are dark, backward, and
Poverty.
uncivilized, and so on. And by the way, in passing, to the extent that we talk about Western civilization, we're talking about an aspiration the West still has to achieve. But they do think they're civilized. They do think that the West is a civilization. So the idea that they're African is repugnant when Yanis Varoufakis tells this audience but they are African. So here we're dealing with a combination of denial, because there does come a time when there is enough information available to the European for the European to know that her origins are African.
Absolutely.
Beyond that, what we're dealing with is denial. And therefore, for me, how do we deal with this paradox of colonialism, which in part is about this colonizer who's haunted by what he has done to the colonized, and the colonized has come to hate the colonizer. Both are in need of cleansing. And by the way, the super Africans amongst us will say, no, we are Putu Gogo. The white colonizers who perpetrated the crime here of apartheid colonialism do not need cleansing. Before I come to why both the colonized and the colonized need cleansing, let's start with us. You are aware of a people who are called Amandawe or Amanzawe, who are no more. Where they exist, where their descendants exist in number, they are but a fraction of what they used to be. What happened to their ancestors? Their ancestors, the ancestors of Amanzawe, were almost decimated by our ancestors, Abenguni and so on. Now, I keep on saying, this country, this land will not know peace until we, the living, work for reconciliation at ancestral level between the ancestors of Amanzawe and our ancestors. You now have the Khoisan. I dislike that term, by the way, Khoisan. I think we should make an effort to know who each of those peoples were instead of using this umbrella name that tells us very little. But that's just me. But let me use this term Khoisan because that's the term we use. The Khoisan say they are the first people. Now, we can quibble with whether they are the first people or not. That's not the point I want to make. The point I want to make is this. They themselves are almost decimated in wars between them and our ancestors. And therefore, this land will not know peace until we work for reconciliation at ancestral level between the ancestors of the people we call the Khoisan, or the first people, and our ancestors. This land will not know peace until we have worked for reconciliation between the ancestors of the Afrikaner child or Boer child and the Boer woman or the Afrikaner woman who dies in an English concentration camp. Now remember, during this war, it is not only the Boers and the English who die. Our own people die. So this land will not know peace until the spirits of our own people who died during what we call the South African War, they like to call it the Anglo-Boer War, we will not know peace until the spirits of our forefathers and mothers, the spirits of our ancestors, the spirits of the Boer children, Boer mothers, who who died in English concentration camps. On the one hand, and the spirits of the ancestors, of the perpetrators, the English. Until there's reconciliation between all these parties, South Africa will not know peace. Why am I raising this? I am raising peace because we tend to make the mistake of elevating our suffering over the suffering of our others. Suffering is suffering. And one of the reasons more than 26,000 Palestinians have died in Gaza is because you have a people that feels justified to do what they are doing to Palestinians because they are elevating their pain and suffering over the Holocaust, over the pain and suffering of others. They pretend that the Holocaust in Germany was the first Holocaust in history. We had a Holocaust too. Holocaust in Africa, which happened before the Holocaust in Germany, too. But of course, they were not Holocausts, they were not called genocides, because those who were doing the dying were not European and white. And why I'm raising this about us, that we should be humble ourselves about this. Why I'm raising the need to cleanse the colonizer and the colonized is that we must be humble. Because our ancestors, the spirits of our ancestors, need to be cleansed for the things they did to others, for the pain and suffering they caused to others. So it is not enough for us as black people, as Africans, to think only of ourselves as victims. In history, we have been perpetrators too. And as perpetrators, we ourselves are in need of cleansing. And what we see also, for instance, the xenophobic violence of 2008 caused me a lot of pain. There's one image I can't...
The Burning Man.
Yes, the Mozambican. That's not... The sight of him burning is not what haunts me, by the way. It is the sight of South African children laughing at this burning man that haunts me. Because when I saw that, I said, what have we taught our children? And what have we taught our children? We have taught our children that that Mozambican is not as human as a South African. So to those children, he is not human. That is why they can laugh as he is burning and dying. What's the point I'm making? We must be humble. We, victims of apartheid and colonialism, must be humble because we have caused suffering ourselves to another. But more importantly, our suffering was not evidence of our purity. And those who suffer pain, that pain and suffering does not mean they are not going to visit pain and suffering upon another. This is why we're having a genocide in Gaza today. Because you would not have thought that the victims of the Holocaust would visit upon Palestinians what they are doing today.
So I would like to go to the beginning. Like, where did you grow up? And can you give us your...
I grew up in Pefeni,
Okay.
Orlando West, Sintu Street. About 10 houses from Kaiser Motaung's house where he grew up.
Okay.
And that's a story I will tell you another day. It's a very interesting story. So when Boy, that's the name Kaiser was called by Boy. So when Boy, Kaiser Motaung, comes back from America and forms Kaiser 11, which becomes Kaiser Chiefs, almost every family in Pefeni decides to become Chiefs supporters. 2 or 3 families, including mine, stay Orlando Pirates. And what that meant, for instance, is that my father and Kaiser Mutaung, who worked in the same building, a Clemson house, if they got into the lift at the same time or one found the other in the lift, they would not even greet because of this thing, Pirates and Chiefs. When Pirates beat Chiefs, we would run to make noise outside Kaiser's house as Pirates fans. And if Chiefs beat Pirates, the next morning, the Kaiser Chiefs bus
Yes.
would stop at our gate and hoot and make noise.
Yes.
So that's the kind of relationship. So I always tell people that I saw Kaiser Chiefs coming into being. So if you talk about Ace Nsolengu used to stand at our fence to listen to my mother and father playing jazz. And when they asked him, why don't you come in? He said, I can't. There'll be hell to pay if I'm seen coming into this Orlando Pirates home. But there was another real fear, If, let's say there's a derby, he had been seen at our house and Chiefs loses and he didn't have a good game, it would mean we gave him too much delicious food. Or we bought him maybe with a plate of food or whatever,
So you grew up with your mama and dad, that sounds like.
Yes, I grew up.
What a privilege.
And
siblings also.
I grew up with mama, no dada, and we are 5. My elder sister left with my grandfather and grandmother when she was 3. They first went to Southern Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, and then Northern Rhodesia, which is now Zambia. So my sister has been in the U.S. since she was 10, because my grandfather moved to the U.S., where he taught at a Jewish university, Yeshiva University in New York. So my elder sister is Unomvuyo, and then I'm the second born.
Okay.
I have a younger sister, Nosipo, a younger brother, my only brother, Sandile, and the last born, Unomonde.
Okay. But the second borns are very rebellious. Was that the same for you?
I think quietly so, because I remember one of the conversations we had a lot with my mother before she passed on. She passed on in May 2022.
Wow.
Is how my mother says, we would tell you not to do something or to do something. But unlike your siblings, you're not going to talk back. And I say to her, yes, I'm not going to talk back, because once I've decided I'm not doing something, I don't have to say anything. I'm not going to do it. So I suppose rebellious in that way. But I was also very quiet. And what people believe when they're told this about me, don't believe, I mean. I was very shy. I'm still very shy. And so some ask, if we are so shy, why are you on TV? Why are you talking to Ntsiki now on this platform? And I say to them, I'm a performer. Being on radio is a performance. Addressing a conference is a performance. I'm on stage. And in some way, that is not atypical of a Scorpio, because some Scorpios love the limelight, but cannot cope with human interaction off stage. And the same applies to me. I really don't know what to do with myself in the presence of other human beings, except when I'm on stage.
I want to get a more clearer understanding of your journey, because obviously everybody gets to where they are because of the corners they went into. I mean, you even spoke about you were a teacher at one point. Just give us the story.
Well, the spiritual journey
The
or
whole
my
thing.
life journey?
Yeah.
Well, primary school, I went to Mzamo. It's not far from the Sisulu home.
Okay.
Next to the Sisulu home, there's a church there, Anglican church,
Okay.
Holy Cross.
Okay.
Next to the...
This is in Pefeni.
This isn't all of it in Orlando, it's Pefeni.
Okay.
Not far from Orlando, not Uncle Tom's Hall. If you know
Okay.
Uncle Tom's
Yes.
Hall, the
Okay, now I can
Hector
see it.
Memorial, there's a
Yes.
church.
Yes, I
Not
see
far
that
from the
church. It's
Hector
actually quite a
Peterson.
conscious church. Yes.
It's a Holy Cross. That's where I was
Okay.
baptized. Mm-hmm. And that's where I was confirmed. I then went for my higher primary, I went to Tulasizwe.
Okay.
It's also in Orlando West. It's next door to a Catholic school called Blessed Martin. The interesting thing about Tulasizwe is that Tulasizwe was two schools in one. It was a Xhosa school with a Xhosa principal, Mr. Mkaba, and a Zulu school with its own principal. And there were times when there was no love lost between the Xhosa staff and the Zulu staff.
What?
Yes, because of tribalism.
In the same school?
Yes, in the same school. So we're in the same building, but it's two schools, a Xhosa school but remember, in those days in Soweto, if you're Xhosa, you went to a Xhosa school. If you're Sotho, you went to a Sotho school, If you're a vendor, you went to a vendor school, and so on. It just so happened that in this school, we had two schools in one, because the Xhosas in Soweto in those days were very few in number. And so we ended up being this small group of Xhosa learners in what essentially was a Zulu school. So besipacile, actually, So the tensions became so sharp that we had to move. I mean, to me, what happened was biblical. So our school was being built. This is 1976. Our school, new school that we are going to move to, is still being built. Kwantsikana. So the tensions between the Xhosa staff and the Zulu staff become so sharp that our principal one day, Mr. Mkaba, announces that siyafuduka, we're moving. And why I say it is biblical, I mean, it's one of those images that are etched in my memory. These hundreds of higher primary school children walking to what is going to be their new school, which is still unfinished. It was built on the site of what was a beer hall, which was burnt down during the 76 riots, So we are walking from Tulasizwe to Kwantsikana. It's still unfinished. And Mr. Mkaba said, each one of you will carry your desk. So there we were walking this distance, maybe 4 kilometers. Each one of us carrying his desk. And that's how we opened Kwantsikana, before it is even finished. Then I went to Daluonga in Dube, where I was expelled in 1977.
For student activism?
My parents' fault this time. Because what happens is the Boers decide that each child must re-register because schooling had stopped because of the 76 riots, And we reached a point where we were no longer going to school, and the government decided, the education department decided that each child must re-register. And there was a meeting, if I remember, it was convened by the Committee of 10 of Motlana, Tate, Mantata, and so on. And the parents in that meeting decided they were going to defy this call by the government for their children to re-register. So the decision they take is that they are not going to re-register. On the day in September on which we're supposed to go back to school. We will go to school, but we shall not have registered. The day came, went to school was full, assembly is called. Mr. Mlokoti, who was the principal, and subsequently became the chairperson of Kaizer Chiefs, by the way. So Mr. Mlokoti says, look, the department said you must re-register. If you did not re-register, get out. You are no longer a student. That's what happened. That's how we were expelled. And look, I was not perturbed at all when he said we must leave, because I thought, oh, no one's leaving. The parents took a decision that they're not re-registering. It turned out we were a handful who did not register. The rest did re-register.
Isn't that the case also now in politics now? That as black people we'll decide, Guti, okay guys, this is rubbish. We're not going to do this. But when it's time to actually do it.
Yes, when I was younger, my analysis of that situation was quite harsh. The older I get, I become a bit soft and more understanding. But look, these are parents who are worried about the future of our children and all of that. But that's how my schooling ends in Dalwanga, because my parents did not re-register me. And it turns out I'm one of a very few who did not re-register. The rest did re-register, and they continued and wrote exams. And I stayed at home. And then in 1978, my parents decided I should go with my sister and their cousin sister, go to Durban. So I lived in Lamontville with my aunt and went to school eMlazi, Soweto, Kwavi. Now, that detail is very important because the freeway that passes just in front of our school, Soweto, is the Mangosuthu freeway. The same Mangosuthu freeway, people were shot.
Phoenix.
Kwamnyandu, a station.
Oh, okay.
See, this is what happens. The IFP complains when the ANC says we're changing the name of this freeway from Mangosuthu to Mqenge. And the IFP says no. The ANC is imposing this name Mqenge by the gumboot. At the time, I'm a columnist for the Business Day. I say it is a reach of the IFP to say this, because the name Mangosuthu Freeway was imposed not by the gumboot, but by the bullet. People who protested were shot, Kwamnyandu, a station. And I think I ended the column, or somewhere in the middle of the column, I said, how do I know? And I say, I was there, because I was a student, Soweto, Kwavi, and that freeway passes right in front of Soweto. Then I came back to Joburg and matriculated at Lamola High School in Meadowlands, Zone 5, which was a Shangaan and Venda school. And you had two classes that were not Shangaan and Venda. And let me say Tsonga, because the difference between Tsonga and Shangaan is historically not unimportant. And some people who are Tsonga don't want to be called Shangaan. So you had one class for Sotho children and one class for Xhosa children. And the rest of the school was Venda and Tsonga. And that's how I learned to speak a bit of Tsonga. Then I went to the Soweto College of Education, where I did a secondary teacher's diploma, specializing in mathematics and science. And the year we graduated in 1985, only 7 students graduated with maths and science, going into a population in Soweto of 3 million people, you know. And then later, when I was a teacher, I decided to go to Vista, where I majored in history and English literature. I left teaching in 1996 to join government as a spokesperson for the MEC for Education, Mary Metcalf, who has become one of my best friends. And then in 1999, when Mazwai became premier, I was transferred with Chilizi Rachidanga, who himself became one of my best friends, to the premier's office to join the strategy unit. And Moses Kakane was the director of strategy, and I was the deputy director. And we were best friends even then. I mean, we've been friends since, for close to 40 years now.
Wow.
We taught at the same school, St. Matthew's, which is a private Catholic school in Soweto.
Beautiful.
In fact, the story of how we met is interesting because for me, it is the story of how Izinyanya will intervene. We, I think, did not at the time understand the significance of our meeting and later of us meeting Chilizi Rachidanga. But it had nothing to do with our efforts. That Chilizi Rachidanga, Moses Kakane and I will become friends, work together. It was by ancestral design.
Why do you say that?
You know, one morning, our principal, Sister Michael, says to me, Aubrey, we have a problem. We need a Zulu history and English teacher, which is quite a tricky combination. So she says we have a vacancy there. Just listen around if you hear of someone who has this combination of subjects. Can you tell that person and to come for an interview, and maybe we will fill the vacancy. So later that afternoon, I go to our office. By that I mean the office of the National Education Union of South Africa, which was a teachers' union that was an affiliate of the UDF, and therefore, of course, not recognized by the department. So I go to the office that afternoon. When I get there, our administrator says to me, Aubrey, there was a guy here. He says he's from KZN, and he ran away because Inkatha went to his school, surrounded him, beat him, stabbed him, and all of that. He almost died, but managed to run away and ends up here in Joburg. In fact, for some time, Moses Kakane and Ace Makashule are sleeping on benches in Joburg Park until someone offers them a place to sleep at Kenya College. So this is how Ace Makashule and Moses Kakane know each other, because they slept on the benches.
Unbelievable.
Because Ace Makashule himself had run away, because remember, the Boers in the Free State were sponsoring gangsters to attack comrades. And many comrades, including Ace Makashule, had to flee the Free State. And this is how Ace Makashule ends up in Joburg, meets Moses Kakane, and they're sleeping on the benches in Joburg Park. But to cut a long story short, so the administrator says, this guy says he is a teacher, Zulu, history, and English. The same thing Sister Michael in the morning said we need.
Oh my goodness.
A teacher who teaches Zulu, history, and English. Now that combination is quite unusual.
I know, right?
But, so this is what Sister Michael says to me in the morning. And in the afternoon, when I go to the office, I get this message. And I say to the administrator, please tell him I will be here after school tomorrow. And that's how I meet him for the first time. I tell him there's a vacancy. He's got the right subjects. He must go the next day. I will tell the principal that he's coming. He must go the next day to be interviewed. But I said to him, don't tell the principal you know me. You know, you might not get the job. Because when I first get to the school, the principal celebrates the fact that I had been fired. I was fired in my first day of teaching in '86 for political reasons. So when I tell the principal that I have been fired, that's why I'm applying for a post at St. Matthews, she celebrates. You are the kind of teacher we need. But of course, later, I become a political problem, even for her. I become a political problem. So I say to Muzi, don't tell the principal you know me, because you might not get the post. For more than a month, our colleagues don't know we know each other. In fact, some have introduced me to Muzi, not knowing we know each other. Another person actually we taught with at St. Matthews is the late Fakey Mento.
Okay.
So Fakey Mento, Moses Kakan and I taught at
St. Matthews.
St. Matthews. Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, we hardly have any time, but I do want to get into your political journey and your spiritual journey. How do these come about?
Well, my parents were my first teachers when it comes to politics. Partly because one of the things they kept on saying to us is that it doesn't matter who, how old they are, what position they hold. If they are wrong, you must tell them. Now, of course, they got to regret that, because the people on the receiving end of that sometimes were teachers. And sometimes I would be sent home for insubordination. I think I'm blessed, because when it comes to my involvement in the struggle, I was involved in many dimensions of the struggle. I was a member of COSAS at school, the Congress of South African Students. At college, I joined AZASO, the Azanian Students Organization. I was also part of the ANC's political underground.
Okay.
Later, I became part of the armed struggle as a member of Umkhonto weSizwe.
Okay.
And that is why I sometimes say to people, I was not a card-carrying member of the ANC. I was a gun-carrying member of the ANC. And I also say I was blessed, because I got involved in the 4 areas, the 4 pillars of the struggle. When it came to mass mobilization, I was involved. UDF, Civic Association, Soweto Youth Congress, and so on. I was part of the political underground. I was part of the military underground, and to some extent engaged in the international pillar.
What are some of these experiences? Sorry if I cut you off. Like, when you guys speak of MK and like armed struggle, you know, to us, we're just like, what? Like, what is the lived experience?
Well, what you must remember is that in those days, you did not join the ANC. You were recruited. So there was a process of what I suppose we can call quality control, which you don't have now. And that is why you end up with the mess we have today, you know, because Kukaba, becomes part of the movement. But on the other hand, there's a contradiction in what I'm saying. We were interested in mass mobilization, while at the same time, some of us looked down on those who joined the ANC after the ANC was unbanned. We shouldn't. That's what we worked for, you know. The SACP is the same. I didn't join the SACP. I was recruited to the SACP. Now, what it meant, one had to struggle, as I said, different dimensions of the struggle. Now, the underground work, particularly the military work, had certain challenges, because I had more than one identity, you know. For instance, the phone would ring, and the person on the other side of the line will say to my ex-wife, we want to talk to Sydney. And I will hear her saying, Agna Sydney up. Then I knew it's a comrade, MK. So I'll go and stand next to the phone. The phone rings and I pick it up. Then I get orders or whatever it is that they needed from me. But it also involved creating what we called legends, for instance. Some people say lies. I'll give an example. There was what we call the theory of necessary evil. And when I look at what's going on in Gaza, I see aspects of that, actually. And what it meant, for instance, to give a practical example, you had to hype up members of the unit or a cell by telling them a story about something that did not happen. So I remember we had to go on a mission once. And I decided to hype them up. I'm going to tell them about an attack. The police attacked this community. Now, this attack did not happen, but it achieved what I wanted them to achieve. It hyped them up. They were angry and did excellent work when the time came for the mission. Now, of course, what underground work did, particularly my work in MK did, it made me discover parts of myself I didn't know. There are parts of myself I discovered that I liked a lot. And there are parts of myself I discovered which to this day I do not like. I discovered, for instance, that I did not have as much of a problem with violence as I thought I did. And that is why I argue, for instance, that in the context of a just armed struggle, of a just war, the oppressor and the oppressed both are contaminated by violence. I have asked a question. I will ask you the same question because I don't have an answer. Despite the fact that I understand that we are contaminated by violence, tell me why, if today we're faced with the same conditions, I would still pick up arms and be a member of MK, despite what I've just said. I've asked this question many times. I don't have an answer. Now, of course, while I'm in the struggle, something has been happening throughout my life. I have two dreams throughout my life, two. In one dream, I'm under the sea. In another, it's a dream of snakes. When I dream being under the sea, I wake up afraid to drown, and the sea is around the bedroom. If it's a dream of snakes, when I wake up, the bedroom is full of snakes. Now, the beautiful thing, or maybe ugly thing, I don't know, is that I then realize something else as I'm growing up. I know things before they happen. I see things about people, but at that age, I'm afraid to tell them what I've dreamt about. But the things I dream about happen, And then in our unit, and to honor the people I worked with, I will name our missionary. Our missionary, in the end, was called the Scelodloma missionary, in honor of Scelodloma. We never went on a mission unless we went to a healer called Ntsiki. We called him Ntsiki for obvious reasons. He had a very long beard. So we'd go to him before a mission, and then he would say, "Kuyakhanya," which means we can continue the mission, or "Kumnyama," which means we don't continue with the mission. The only time we did not go to Ntsiki to consult before we went on a mission. That's how we got our criminal record. Me, Moses Kakane, and Wandile Mazibuko, the brother of the MEC, Faith Mazibuko. In fact, as we go to Katlehong, where we're going to do this work, I say to Wandile and Skakan that we're not going back home today. That we are going on this mission, and we did not start by consulting Ntsiki. We are going to be arrested today, and we were captured by the SANDF, charged, convicted, you know. But that Ntsiki is the first one to tell me I've got the calling. Because I go to him, I'm early, the comrades have not arrived, and he says to me, I'm glad you are early because every time you are here, something comes up about you, La Emsamo. And he says, tell me about your dreams. And I tell him about these two dreams. And he asked me about the water. Is it clean? Is it dirty? I said, there's nothing more crystal clear than what I see in these dreams. And he said, that's what I see here, son. You've got the calling. Now, what was funny, remember, I grew up in a family of Christians who are educated. We did not even slaughter a cockroach for this nyang. Had no relationship, spiritual relationship with the ancestors. That's the kind of family I grew up with. So when he says, uyabizwa, I ask, ngibizwa ubani? Because I don't know what that is about. And then he says to me, you've got the gift. And they say, you can go in now, or you can wait for them. Of course, I waited for them.
Yes.
And it took me 30 years, because things happened during that 30 years. So had I complied, I would have gone to a Ephesweni when I was in my mid-20s. You know, I go to a Ephesweni 30 years.
How do you end up at Ephesweni? And how old are you then?
I end up at Ephesweni because in 2013, I start getting sick. I'm sick all the time. I think it was in 2014 when there's a month when I had a headache 24/7, terrible headache 24/7. And I'm referred to a specialist. They put all sorts of you know. I'm connected to all sorts of machines. And all the tests are negative. The specialist says all the tests are negative. I can see you're in terrible pain, but clinically you're fine. There's no problem with you. I sort of knew what's happening because I had a new dream. And in this dream, I'm next to a lake. Behind the lake is a forest. And what I hear is the sound of the drums, sangoma drums. There are no sangomas inside. It's just me, the lake, and the mist rising out of the lake and this forest. And the first time I did the dream, I knew it's time. So it keeps on recurring. I keep on getting more and more sick. And I become sick in other ways. I can't think anymore, which means I can't write my business day article anymore. I can't get to work. Bavala yonke into. Or angithi yonke into iyavaleka because I'm not sure about this thing yokuthi ba. You see, yonke into iyavaleka. So I'm not getting work. My personal relationships are suffering. Things are just collapsing. And I'm sick all the time, you know. Until in 2015, July 18, I wake up and I say to my ex-wife, let's go to Ubabu's Banban at Twatwa. We get to him, he's a healer at Twatwa. And I tell him about this dream, and he says, "Ungazongibhedela. You know what this dream means." I say, "Yeah, humor me. What's happening here?" He says, "No, it's not just time. The time has passed. And they say, if you do not go your trust within a year, you will be dead." But that's not why I decided to go trust in 2015. No, that's not the reason, actually. It was not out of the fear of dying. I have an epiphany one day. Because from 2013, I started developing an interest in quantum physics, and I don't know where this comes from, you know? But the epiphany is linked to this growing interest in quantum physics. I'm sitting thinking, no, Izangoma do not predict. The true Sangoma is free from the limitations of time and space. And therefore, when such a Sangoma says, such and such a thing is coming, it's because they're already there. In fact, they're always there. Because I, fortunately, have the same gift. I am free from the limitations and limits of time and space. There's no past for me, there's no present, there's no future. There's just here. So I am everywhere in time and everywhere in space at any given moment. So when I say to you, there's a storm coming from Nkandla, it's because I'm there. Why? Because I'm always there. Because spirit is everywhere. And that is why people come to me and say, we want to go to the grave of my grandfather. I say, no, fine. The symbolism is good. But the spirit of your grandfather is everywhere. You actually don't have to go to the grave. But I understand the symbolism is
important to you.
It's very important to me. So I went Ugo Trasaben in 2015. And I must be honest. You know, what they say in 2015 is that sizozibambela. But they also say to the woman who became uGobela wam, Usmane Sezwe, they say to her, sizozibambela, but you will be uGobela wakhe, meaning you will be our assistant. And that's how it proceeded, you know. In fact, since then. I've just finished a period of initiation right now. I've entered a new phase in my journey. And it's very clear to me that ngizotwasa ngizenyofa. But there's only one problem. We don't die. Remember, we all have one life, and that life is eternal. So we don't die. The body dies. So death, for me, does not exist. What we call death, the death of the body, is just a comma in a sentence. And after the comma, the sentence continues. So we all have one life, and that life is eternal. And that life is about one thing, and one thing only. It's a journey of reaching for your higher self. And that journey is eternal. And so, because I'm not going to die, ngizotwasa kaningi throughout my eternal life. So this idea, you know, I hear Izangoma saying, 6 months ngiqedile, 1 year ngiqedile. Abanye bayabhostelana, hayi mina ngithwaste 10 minutes, hayi mina ngithwaste 20 minutes. Bayabhostelana. And I'm thinking, actually, if your journey is true, it's eternal.
Yeah.
And uzotwasa kaningi
Yes.
throughout your eternal journey.
Yes.
And why kumele uthwase kaningi? There is so much out there. And I'm saying out there because I want to be understood. I don't believe there's a spiritual realm, by the way. It's all here. There's no ancestral realm. There's no spiritual realm. It's all here. It's all here. So you don't die and go to a spiritual realm. It's all here.
Are you saying that it's invisible to us, to the naked eye?
We are conditioned not to see certain things. We are socially conditioned not to see certain things. For instance, we are conditioned to believe that the only thing we can be is to be human beings. Now remember, the word human is an adjective in front of the word being, which means being human is but one way of being. There are other ways of being. To add to that, here, there are other beings with us that are not human. So humans are not the only beings. There are other beings. And being human is not the only way of being. And that is why when I talk about the fact that one of my gifts is freedom from the limits and limitations of time and space. And when I say I'm everywhere in time and I'm everywhere in space, right now as I speak, I am somewhere else. Right now.
And you're everywhere.
Yes. So are you. So are all of us. So are the spirits of our ancestors. They are everywhere. So this idea of traveling, if spirit is everywhere, spirit does not need to travel because spirit is already there. If spirit is everywhere and spirit must travel from this point to that point, there's no need for spirit to travel from this point to that point because spirit is everywhere and therefore is already there.
So if we have access to everything, why do we create things as human beings?
Well,
And
I can
routines
give you
and all these lives we make up?
I can give you tens of answers, but I'll give you one. The mind. Useful instrument, but the mind is a blunt instrument. Now imagine that today is the first day on which you became conscious. You were not conscious before this day. And you see something coming towards you. It has, remember, when you first become conscious, you don't have language.
Yes.
You now have language. You know that that thing you saw when you became conscious is an animal. It came towards you, you reached out, it beat you, you felt, now you have language, you know it was pain. Something red came out. So that's the first day you become conscious. The next day, the same thing comes to you. Are you going to reach out your hand to it? No. Because of what you experienced the day before. That is knowledge. Now, that's a very simple and simplistic way of telling you. But knowledge is always in the past. Think about it. Think of anything you know right now. It's not in the present. Everything you know is in the past. Knowledge is in the past. Knowledge is a product of the mind. The mind, by its nature, is limited. That which it produces is limited too. Because the mind is limited, our interaction with what we call reality is quite limited. Because the mind reduces things, including reality, to what it can grasp. So what we call reality is but a tiny, tiny, tiny part of what reality is. So one explanation then is the limitations of the mind. And that is why I think Descartes is incomplete when he says, or even wrong, in my view, when he says, I think, therefore I am. You think because you have a mind, and the mind is limited. It cannot be that I think, therefore I am. The truth is, I think, therefore I am limited.
Oh, wow. So we shouldn't think.
Oh, no. Think, but change the way you think.
Aha.
You must change the way we think. to appreciate that this is a tiny part of what we call, this is not reality. Tiny part of what we call reality. And when I say we need to think differently, it's because your question you ask, because we are not connecting to that which we should connect to, which will give us a better idea of our position in reality. And what, at least if we do not understand reality as a whole, because only God has that capacity, we will at least have the appreciation that what we regard as reality is but a tiny part of what reality is. And that is why in this journey of reaching for your higher self, there are certain things we are taught. Take what Buddhism teaches us, for instance. Buddhism teaches us things such as nothing is distinguishable, meaning you and I are not distinguishable because you are me and I'm you. We are one. What I do to you, I do to myself. Going back to that paradox of colonialism.
Yes.
So what I do to you, I do to myself. If I do something good to you, I am doing something good to myself. If I do something bad to you, I'm doing something bad to myself. But remember, our inability to connect with that which is real, in part, is a function of what we believe. The things we believe, whether through religion or ubungoma or anything, the things we believe have consequences. That's why we need to think much deeper, much more carefully, because the things we believe have consequences. For instance, take God. For me, the God we talk about actually is not God. And that God, in part, lives in the church, lives amongst us as Zangom, the God of our creation. For me, there is God, and there's the God of our creation. God is not a woman. God is not a man. God is not a Christian. God is not black. God is not white. God is not black. God is not a Jew. God is God. Now, the God of our creation is different. This God picks a people and says, you are my chosen people. That's what the God of our creation is like, has chosen people, for instance. The God of our creation hates homosexuals, hates people who are trans, gay, lesbian, or fluid. You know,
the woman is the rib.
The God of our creation hates women, and I use the word
hates women
deliberately.
Yep.
The God of our creation hates women, says women are inferior to men.
Yeah.
The God of our creation is the God of patriarchy. Is the God of racism.
Yeah.
Is a God of homophobia.
Yeah.
Is a God of religious intolerance. The God of our making says it is okay to go and bomb a mosque because you are not Muslim. The God of our creation says it is okay to bomb a church because you are not a Christian. I believe the consequence of what I believe takes me here. That God, full stop, not the God of our creation. The same applies to ancestors, by the way. There are ancestors, Izinyanya, full stop, Amadlozi, full stop, and there are ancestors of our creation. And have you noticed that the ancestors of our creation and the God of our creation tend to believe the things we believe?
Yeah.
Is it not interesting? We say this is God. We must worship God. But for some reason, this God tends to believe what we believe. These ancestors tend to believe what we believe. They hate what we hate. They like what we hate. They worship what we worship.
Yeah.
This God. And,
God of our creation.
And these ancestors. The consequence of what I believe God is this. It is not enough to love your neighbor as you love yourself. God sets us a higher standard. And that higher standard is this. You must love your neighbor. You must love the other more than you love yourself. The man must love the woman more than he loves himself. The woman must love the man more than she loves herself. The Jew must love the Christian or the Muslim more than he loves himself. The Palestinian must love the Jew more than he loves himself. The Jew must love the Palestinian more than he loves himself. The Xhosa must love Umsutu more than he loves himself. The Hindu must love himself, must love the Muslim more than he loves himself. Imagine a world in which we are all working towards loving the other more than we love ourselves. Imagine where we land if we fail. We still land at a much better place than where we are now. That's what I believe God wants us to be. To be these beings that love the other more than we love ourselves. That's the consequence of what I believe. Yeah.
So now we're just wrapping up. You can see our time has gone so quickly. Can you just give us a few insights about the upcoming elections and what you are seeing?
Well, there is no doubt in my mind, and I'm going to contradict myself. There is no doubt in my mind that South Africa is heading towards a coalition government at national level. I have no doubt. So my baseline scenario is that there is not a single political party that is going to win an outright majority. We think in May, We may be wrong, but that's what we think. Now, at the same time, that's why I'm saying I'm not going to contradict myself. I look at these opposition parties, especially the plethora of these small political parties that are coming into being now. They all seem to have only one message. Vote for us. We are not the ANC. I don't know how far that takes our politics. I'm not sure how far that's going to take our democracy. What it tells me is that I am not wrong when I say the crisis in our politics cannot be reduced to the crisis in the ANC or the crisis the ANC has become. Ours is a generalized political crisis. The quality of what is on offer is not equal to the tasks we need to perform to ameliorate our people's social, economic, and political conditions, which means I am not ruling out the possibility yet that the ANC may still pass the threshold of 50% plus one. So I'm not ruling it out completely. But my baseline scenario is that we're going to have a government of national unity or disunity, a coalition government at national level after this election. Now, for me, this election is a non-event, by the way. It's a non-event because in relation to what our people get told repeatedly, go and vote because the election is going to change your life. If you want to change your life, go and vote. Now, this election is not going to change our people's lives. It is seldom the case that any election changes the lives of people. What we have fallen into is the trap of what I call a narrow electoralism, voting for voting's sake, in the false belief that an election will deliver the kind of change our people are hungry for. It is not. In that respect, this election is a non-event because it's not going to deliver the kind of change our people get told it is going to deliver. That notwithstanding, we must appreciate the difference between the world as it is and the world as we wish it to be. To get to the world as we wish it to be entails a process of many struggles. So while I say this election is not going to take us to the world as we wish it to be, because reaching a place where the world is as we wish it to be is going to entail struggle. I beg and beseech South Africans to go out in their numbers in the election, to go and vote, because the outcome may be far from perfect, and it will be. The outcome will be far from perfect. As imperfect as it is, it can amount to a breakthrough. It can open up enough space for us to create more space to engage in this process of struggle so that further down in our future, we get closer and closer to the world as we wish it to be.
I do hear you. I hope that you're going to promise to come back again on a panel, an intergenerational panel, and we can unpack some more of the political things. Thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your spirit and energy with us. Moya writes, another end of a beautiful episode. I know you guys want 2 hours. Please, can you donate to the channel so that we can actually book 2 hours, guys? The bank details are on screen. The more you contribute, the easier it is for me to have extended episodes for you guys. So I'll see you again next time.
Who are you when all you were has been diluted by lies and white lines cancelling out all that which has been written of your history? Why do you look at yourself as a mystery? Doesn't the sun shine because you open your eyes? Doesn't the moon stay situated within the same stars your DNA sparkles off? Your spirit knows that surely corner into e off. Buza umoya so you may return to being well off. Because spiritually you are rich, yet your ancestors cry because you are out of reach. But yours is to command all elements while God takes inspiration from the very mirror she looked at to become. Remember who you are and never finish just when they think that with you they are done.